500 American soldiers march into a dense forest and vanish. No reinforcements, no supplies, no way out. The enemy thinks they've won, but they don't know who they're dealing with. October 2nd, 1918, deep in the Argonne Forest of France. The final offensive of World War I was underway, and Major Charles Whittlesey and his men, nearly 700 strong, were ordered to advance no matter what. Their objective? Seize a critical hill and break the German lines. And they did. But within hours, everything changed. The French on their left flank wiped out, the Americans on their right fell back, and the Lost Battalion, alone, deep behind enemy lines, with no backup coming. The men dug in, knowing they were cut off completely. No food, no water, no escape. And then the German counterattack began. Hundreds of enemy soldiers poured into the forest, surrounding them on all sides. The Germans sent a runner under a white flag, carrying a message. "You are surrounded. Surrender and you will be treated well." Major Whittlesey read the note, looked up, and crumpled it in his fist. His answer? Go to hell. And with that, the battle for survival had begun. The Germans close in from all sides. Machine guns tear through the trees. The Americans are outnumbered 10 to 1, but they refuse to surrender. The first wave came at dawn. Hundreds of German soldiers stormed the hills, machine guns blazing. The Americans fought back with everything they had, firing from foxholes and behind fallen trees. The air was thick with bullets, smoke, and screams. Then came the hand-to-hand combat. When ammunition ran low, the Americans fixed bayonets. They fought in the mud, in the trenches, in the shattered forest, using knives, fists, and rifle butts. The Germans expected an easy surrender. Instead, they found hell. And then, the unthinkable happened. The American artillery, unaware that the Lost Battalion was trapped, began shelling their own men. Explosions ripped through the trenches. Men screamed as shrapnel tore through their ranks. Smoke filled their lungs. The Germans pulled back, thinking the Americans were finished. But as the dust settled, the survivors reloaded their weapons. They weren't dead yet. But if they didn't find a way to stop the friendly fire, they soon would be. The Americans are being bombed by their own side. No radios, no flares, no hope, except for one last desperate chance, a single pigeon. Pinned down by German snipers, bombarded by their own artillery, the Lost Battalion had no way to call for help. No flares, no radios. Their only hope? Carrier pigeons. The first pigeon was released and immediately shot down. The second made it barely 100 yards before a bullet shredded its wings. That left just one, a small bird named Cher Ami. Major Whittlesey wrote the message. "We are along the road parallel to 276.4. Our own artillery is dropping a barrage directly on us. For God's sake, stop it." Cher Ami took off, flapping hard. Bullets filled the air. The Germans knew what was happening. They fired everything they had. A round tore through Cher Ami's chest. Another blew off one of her legs. She was bleeding, barely conscious, but she kept flying, 25 miles. When she arrived at the American base, she collapsed, but the message was delivered. The artillery stopped. 200 men would live because of her. And Cher Ami, she survived. She was awarded the French Croix de Guerre for bravery and became one of the most famous animals in military history. But for the men still trapped in the forest, the nightmare was far from over. 6 days, no food, no water, no sleep. The men of the Lost Battalion are starving, wounded, and dying, and the Germans are closing in for the kill. By day 3, the men were out of rations. Starvation set in. Soldiers drank from mud puddles to survive. Their wounds festered, turning black with infection. Then came the gas attacks. The Germans flooded the trenches with deadly mustard gas. Men coughed, choked, clawed at their faces. Some died screaming. Whittlesey and his officers covered their mouths with wet cloths, but the gas lingered, burning their lungs. The lucky ones died quickly. The rest suffered. At night, wolves prowled the battlefield, drawn by the smell of blood. Some men, delirious from hunger, started hallucinating. Others whispered of escape. One man tried. He didn't make it 10 feet. The Germans gunned him down instantly. There was only one way out: survive. The Germans believe the Americans are dead. But when they step into the forest, they come face to face with something terrifying. The Germans stopped attacking. Days passed. No gunfire, no movement. They thought the Americans were dead. Then, a German soldier entered the trenches, and what he saw would haunt him forever. The men of the Lost Battalion were still alive, covered in blood, mud, and filth, their faces hollow, their eyes like corpses. They had been starving, dying, but they were still standing. When the Germans opened fire, they fired back. The Germans panicked. Some ran without orders. Others refused to go near the trenches. They had never seen men fight like this. They had faced an army. Now they were facing ghosts. And ghosts don't surrender. 6 days, 500 men, no food, no water, and then rescue. But when help finally arrived, it was too late for most. On October 7th, the American reinforcements finally broke through. When they reached the Lost Battalion, what they found was horrifying. 500 men had gone in. Only 194 walked out. Bodies piled in the trenches, wounded men covered in maggots, eyes so sunken they barely looked alive. Major Whittlesey? He refused to leave until every wounded man was carried out. They weren't just survivors, they were legends, because in war, weapons kill. But willpower? Willpower makes history. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories that connect the past to the present and beyond.